Hi friends, welcome back, or welcome if you're new here to my channel. My name is Caroline. I like to do knitting and crocheting videos on my channel, and today I got a 2025 recap of my second year of Destashing, including data. So in today's video I'm going to walk you through my projects, the yarn I used, the fiber I used, colors I gravitated towards, and maybe most importantly or most interesting to you, how much yarn I actually used this year. So if that sounds interesting to you, then please do keep on watching and let's get into it. Let's start with the bigger picture. I do both knitting and crocheting, and while I usually say I'm more of a knitter than a crocheter, even though I started with crochet, I actually did more crochet projects this year than knitting. Now, I am talking about the number of projects, and I like to make that distinction because I do truly believe that I did still spend more time knitting than crocheting. But either way, I was still surprised that even with projects counted, crochet came on top with 53.5%, which means that I basically made equal knitting and crocheting projects, which if you would have asked me, I would not have told you that. I would have said I knitted more. As I said, I normally think of myself as a knitter first, but now that I actually know the results and I look back, I did crochet quite a lot this year. Crochet projects tend to give me that instant gratification, and they tend to use up a little bit more yarn, which is a very attractive trait if you are destashing. I also did make a whole lot of home decor this year. I will get into that later in this video, but the craft I use most of that is usually crochet, so it kind of makes sense. Now, as I said, if we look at time invested, I do still believe I spent more time knitting this year than crocheting. In the end, I don't actually know, which is why next year I would really like to actually time and find out how much hours I spent on a project. I just would like to track the time my project takes me because I am curious. I would like to know if I actually did spend more time on knitting or crocheting next year. Now, let's talk about the colors I use. This one cracked me up because I could have told you the result before we started this year. My most used color is green with 33.3%. I did 1/3 of my projects in green. A whole third. I don't remember buying this much green yarn. Like, I know I gravitate towards greens and blues, but 1/3? And the worst part is that I still have so much green left in my stash. So next year is probably gonna be the same. As I said, I gravitate towards greens and blues. Those are just the colors I like, as you can see right here. I'm very predictable that way. So blue being in the second place really wasn't surprising to me either. They're just the colors I like most, and also the colors that I buy most, or at least used to buy most, so it all makes sense to me. White, however, being in third place was kind of surprising to me. I guess neutrals do kind of just sneak into everything, so it does make a little bit of sense. Just wouldn't have expected it. Let me know if you were to track the colors that you use. Which color do you think would come up on top? Alright, let's continue to fiber content. Cotton was my surprise champion, and while I was surprised by this, I do think it makes a lot of sense because a good chunk of my stash was cotton yarn. And as I said, I made a whole lot of home decor, which I tend to use cotton for. Merino and wool make up almost half if we combine them, which definitely feels right for someone who likes to make sweaters and other types of garments. Acrylic yarn was only 7.6%, which I have to say I actually thought would be lower. I was quite surprised by the 7.6%, mainly because I barely have any acrylic in my yarn stash. And while I say that, I think this number would probably even have been higher if I had more acrylic in my yarn stash, because I did use up all acrylic this year. Mohair was at good 2.9%. Which is very low, but it does reflect me moving away from the fluffy fibers. Alright, let's discuss the yarn weights. Finger and weight yarn took the first place, which was a little bit surprising to me. I knew I had a lot of finger and weight yarn, but when I look at all my yarn right now, I wouldn't even have told you that a lot of finger and weight has been used this year and has left my stash. My fingering weight power is probably still my highest in my stash, and the visual difference of the start and the end of this year really wasn't that big. But I guess that is what makes tracking all of this so fun. I can actually see that I did make progress, and not a small amount either. I would say that Aaron was a bit of a surprise, being as high as it was, but Spirit and DK made a lot of sense to me, since that is definitely my sweet spot in creating. Alright, now we've got that out of the way, let's reflect on what I actually made. Home items, homeware, home decor, things like blankets, tapestries, pillows, things like my plant hanger, but also my towels and dishcloth. They dominated my year with almost 40%, which is crazy. Again, this is counted by projects, not by time invested. Usually home decor items are a lot quicker and easier to make than a whole sweater. But I was quite surprised that it was still 40% of my projects. Now they are fast and easy, and they do tend to be pretty great for stash busting. So in the end it does make a lot of sense, and one of my goals was to make more home decor this year because I wanted to decorate my house a little bit more now that I have lived in it for over 2 years. So I said, while garments were smaller categories, I do think I spent my most time on these. The fact that both socks, sweaters, cardigans and tops all tied at a 7.3% tells me I had a very balanced year of garment making, which I'm actually really happy about. T-shirts being 2.4% is kind of wild to me. It tells me I need to make more t-shirts, especially because the t-shirts I make are one of my most frequently worn items in my wardrobe. So I definitely want to make more tees next year. So who did I make all these items for? This one makes me laugh because 80.5% of my projects were for me, which, listen, I'm more than happy about. I know I make most things for myself. I only really make stuff for others for special occasions like birthdays or the holidays. And I think we deserve to make most of our items for ourselves. In the end, we invest the time and money in the projects, so to me it makes sense that most of them are going towards yourself. And yes, I do really enjoy gift making. So I might try for like a 70-30% split next year. But all in all, I'm still happy with this number. I don't really care about this number, I just thought it was funny to find out because I do think I made quite a lot of gifts this year. And as I said, I've been really enjoying making gifts, so I would just like to do it more because I enjoy it as well. Alright, this is the real heart of my destashing story. Let's talk about how much yarn went in and out each month. Some months we saw big usage, others saw maybe bigger acquisitions. But the way I acquired the yarn this year is what I'm most happy about. Now, I did buy some new stuff, mostly to finish projects that I was working on and to sweater quantities of yarn as a little reward for destashing. And they both already have a plan too. But the way I acquired the biggest portion of my yarn this year is by finally frogging projects I never wore or used. This is yarn that would eventually end up in my yarn stash anyway, and well, I could have just left them as finished objects and be like, oh, look at how little yarn I have in my stash at the end of the year. I did not want to do that, because in the end, this yarn was gonna end up in my stash anyway. Not only that, this is gonna save me a lot of money next year too. It's not gonna make me be like, I need to buy yarn. Because in the end, frogging projects you don't use and reusing the yarn is a great way to get more new yarn. And overall, I used a lot of yarn this year. My out numbers peaked several times, especially mid-year when I was starting to get back into the knitting and crocheting. This chart tells a story I'm really happy with. Even when yarn came in, I was consciously knitting and crocheting my stash down all year long. And that consistency is what really matters in the end. There was only 1 month this year where more yarn came in than came out, and that was the month that I frogged all those projects. So overall, even though maybe the start of this year and the end results aren't that far apart, I'm happy with the progress we made. I also am not in a rush to destash all my yarn. I'm pretty happy with where my stash is at the moment. I'm also not financially in a place where I can buy a lot of yarn, so I'm really happy with the yarn I have in stash, because this way I can continue knitting even when I'm not in a place where I can buy all the yarn that I want. I still have yarn in my stash that I can work with, which is really nice. Now, one of my goals this year was to knit more from new designers I was not familiar with before, designers I never used the pattern of before, and this one surprised me in like the best way possible. 56.1% of my projects were made from patterns of designers that I never used before. 29.3% was from designers I've already used patterns of. This does also include patterns from designers that at the beginning of the year I hadn't used a pattern from before, but then if I use multiple patterns of this designer in 1 year, I would only count the first pattern as a pattern from a designer I didn't use before. The other 14.6% was me just freehanding stuff and using my own designs. I think trying so many new designers really kept this year like creatively fresh, and I was also really happy to be supporting some other designers, even though I think a good chunk of the new designers were from designers that have free patterns. I still like to think I'm supporting them by making their patterns and putting it on social media and be like, yo, check these people out. Which at a lot of moments in this year was all I could do financially, so I did my best. It also pushed me out of my comfort zone. I think as a designer though, it's really nice to keep exploring other ways of writing your instructions down or fun ways to incorporate other things in your patterns. So I liked seeing a lot of other new ways of it being done by other designers, so I can also constantly improve my craft as a designer. Even though I don't design an actual resin pattern very often anymore, I do still think it helps me when I do write a pattern. Alright, so what did I actually learn from all of this, and what do I want to take with me in the new year? Tracking helps you see your habits clearly. Not only do I think it's fun, it will also help me create more intentionally in the future. I actually crochet a lot more than I thought I did. Crochet eats up yarn fast, and I think it keeps a lot of things fun. I actually really enjoy crocheting, and I'm happy that I got a more equal divide between knitting and crocheting this year. It's also an excellent stash buster, and I would like to keep this equal divide going next year. Home projects quietly take over. They're deceptively addictive. They're quick and easy, and they also are excellent stash busters. Now, another thing I learned this year is that you don't have to stop buying yarn to destash. Now, yes, it goes faster if you don't buy any more yarn, but I think a good balance of intentionally buying new yarn and destashing is great for me. If I was only destashing, I probably wouldn't have made as many projects this year. I think having a break of some new yarn with a project you're really excited about in between is great. And I think it keeps destashing fun. As long as you stay mindful and intentional with your buying, I don't see any problem with it. And lastly, creativity expands when you try new designers. More than half of my patterns came from people I never worked with before, which after 5 years of creating is pretty solid, if I may say so myself. And honestly, I'm proud of this year. Not because I was perfect, not because my stash magically shrank into nothing, but because I stayed engaged, creative, and most importantly, intentional. And overall, I made things I genuinely love. So this was my 2025 year of destashing. Let me know if you did a year of destashing, how it went. Do you track stuff like this? Did I inspire you to maybe track stuff like this next year? How do you think I did this year? Let me know. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more of me, you can follow me on Instagram and on Ravelry, all under Grenai's Corner. And you can also subscribe to my YouTube channel. I am currently doing Vlogmas. I will be posting posting a video every single day all the way up till Christmas. I definitely have some content still coming your way, and after Vlogmas you will see me at least once a week with a new video. If that sounds interesting, then please do join us. And I guess without further ado, I will see you guys tomorrow.